Yeah, thank you, Chris. I'll do my best. I'm conscious, everybody, that this is the fourth presentation in a row about PSD2 and open banking. So this could go one of two ways. I'm either going to be able to bring a different angle to it, or we should just claw back time and go to lunch now. But hopefully we'll be able to bring, I think, a complementary and a slightly different perspective as well to some of the discussion so far. So just very briefly, a little bit about Token. So we're also a technology business, a technology platform to help the different players of the ecosystem adopt and leverage the opportunity of open banking. So we work with all of the various players around the open banking ecosystem. We're working with payment gateways, we're working with banks. We are being approached by many of the different use cases that we started to talk about already today. What I was planning on doing was spending a few minutes, again, just talking about the open banking context and actually what does this really mean for the industry that we're all involved in. I won't dwell too long on that. Then cover some of the, I guess, the current reality and the real use cases that we're seeing in the early stages of this market. I think some of it will be very, very complementary to what Francesco was saying. And what I'll try and do as well is share a vision of where we think this is going and what this is going to look like and how to get there. So in terms of, I guess, let me see, is clicking working? There we go. So a statement, and there are lots of statements around open banking, lots of conversations around disintermediation and things like that. My view, our view, is there is the potential to create a much more customer-centric commerce environment. And I guess the important elements there are customer centricity, and I'm talking commerce rather than payment. And again, we'll try and build on what does that mean as we go through the conversation. Believe this is true. There are some challenges to get there for sure, but do believe that this is a huge potential. And thinking about, I guess, what does this mean? And there's been plenty of conversation today around what open banking is, and I'm not talking open banking with a big O and a big B in terms of the CMA or the PSD2 directive specifically. They're all enablers of this phenomenon of opening access to banks for data and the movement of money. Traditionally, as we know, banks have been, for very good reasons, pretty closed entities. So they've controlled products, they've controlled distribution, they've controlled brand, and they've fiercely protected access to your information and access to your money for some really good reasons. This is a fundamental shift. So opening secure API access to enable access to data, enable access to move money in a secure way is a really big shift. And in fact, the difficulty of moving money from your bank account is one of the reasons, actually, that the card industry has developed so successfully over many years. It's a much easier way of accessing and moving your money around. We're all very familiar with the current payment ecosystem today. There are a number of players that sit between the buyer and the seller. Again, this is a card world, but you've typically got the issuing bank, you've got the acquirers, the gateways, there's a network in the middle. The whole thing's pieced together with a 16-digit account number in the card example. So it's not the customer, it's a set of numbers that enable the whole thing to piece together and work. There's a whole load of, I guess, discussion and assertions around what might happen to this industry. Will some players get disintermediated? Will it mean the end of certain payment types? What's the role of banks? Do they become a dumb pipe, or do they become the guardians of this whole new world? Will the big merchants try and go direct and cut out the rest of the value chain? Actually, is it the gateways that are best positioned to be the access route for opening up the commerce and the financial world? All of those are probably right, even though they're contradictory. We think there's plenty of opportunity for all of the major players in the ecosystem to really benefit from this change. And there was some interesting studies at the back end of last year that, again, said some contradictory and potentially complementary things. So Accenture went out and spoke to a number of major merchants, relatively small number, but one of the questions they were asking is, will you use open banking as an opportunity to go direct to your customer and try and cut everybody else out of the payment value chain? Over half of the big merchants said they would. Now, will that become a reality? Who knows? There's a lot of things to work through. But at the same time, Consult Hyperion did another great study where they talked to a broad range of merchants of different size. And one of the overriding things was there was a complete lack of awareness of what this all was, open banking and PSD2. And that's not a surprise, right? Unless you're in the industry, it's probably not front and center. However, is someone phoning? I don't know what that is. However, when the merchants understood the opportunity, more immediate payment, different economics, there was a huge amount of interest. So for me, this suggests there's a really interesting opportunity for the gateway industry, I guess the owners of the merchant relationship, the facilitators of commerce. And there's probably a reason to care and move. One, to protect and hold the big customer relationships and enable access to this new world. Two, to help the mass leverage this opportunity. Now, personally, and I'm very, very entrenched in this industry, and of course, I'm very bullish about the opportunity. The world isn't going to change overnight, so this isn't going to be the thing that all of a sudden dramatically changes the revenue dynamics of a gateway, but I think it does open up a really interesting new growth opportunity. The biggest, when we think about this, I think the biggest change to the way the industry and the ecosystem could work based on this open banking is actually around customer centricity and potentially the value chain being turned inside out. So fundamentally, ability for a customer to connect their accounts for information and movement of money creates an environment where the customer can be much more in the center of their world of commerce. They can connect their banking world to their commerce world. So they can connect their bank accounts, sources of identity, their card products, the loyalty points base that we looked at earlier in the Amadeus presentation. They're effectively all parts of their financial world and create secure connections so that they can be used much more seamlessly in their commerce world for signing up for services, paying for things, some of the use cases we saw and looked at. So we think fundamentally this is about an opportunity to really reorientate the value chain. And the winners, I think, will be the ones who take that opportunity to drive a much more customer-centric set of propositions. So we think it's the vision and the opportunity. But if I reflect for a moment on the reality of where we are, and again, I think Francesco and Brian did a great job of bringing to life some of the current considerations. So there are some challenges at the moment. So this world of open banking is early market. I would say it's probably characterized most by inconsistency right now. And that's a few areas. So inconsistency of access. So what do I mean by that? We talked about not all banks yet have got APIs, public or private, available to make the calls to access data and payment. But again, as they do come, there'll be various different standards. So connecting to those will be an industry in themselves. So access is a challenge. I think then, and again, great examples already given around the challenge of user experience, particularly how to improve payments and access. And again, there are different security models out there. Right now we have screen scraping and asking for credentials. And again, this should be an environment where, as Brian was saying just now, the credentials don't need to flow. But also differences in terms of developer experience. So these different APIs will have different developer documentation, different support standards, all making it more challenging. So again, one of the areas of similarity between our business and what Francesco talked about, we're trying to simplify that. So for any businesses that want to connect with banks, we're trying to deliver a single API. So today that enables connection to over 4,000 banks across Europe, and that will grow as all of the banks deliver their open API. That said, and despite some of these challenges and restrictions, it's early market, there are some very real and very interesting use cases coming about. And Actually, a lot of the ones that I was going to talk about, there we go, we're getting there. We've covered in some detail today, so I won't dwell on some of the same things. I'll perhaps talk about some slightly different angles and perspectives that we're seeing in the real use cases. The use cases are falling in the area of payment, as you would expect, of leveraging that data, and also around identity and verification. The payment side, I guess, I mean, I've spent 20-something years in the payment industry. I've been a little bit surprised, actually, that some of the use cases, this really isn't about substitution of cards right now. These are real use cases where there's either a big commercial headache or a big friction headache, and they're mostly areas where I would suspect a lot of the gateways aren't playing right now, so opportunities to access and enter new verticals. So we've talked a little bit today around some of them already. So from a friction perspective, we are seeing a number of examples in areas like, that we touched on already today, the rental sector. To secure that rent, you want to be able to make sure the first payment happens fast and is certain before the direct debit kicks in. It's a great opportunity here. It's probably a world that actually there aren't payment providers solving and supporting that today. Similarly, we're seeing some really interesting use cases around the legal vertical. Bizarre things that I didn't expect, like probate payments and monitoring payments coming in so payments can be made going out. So some really interesting payment use cases which are about speed and friction. Also high-value transactions, which we've talked about in the previous two sessions. Again, the use cases that we are seeing very, very frequently are things like wallet loads. So all of these FX platforms, trading platforms, whether they're crypto, whether they're investment platforms, it's the getting the money in where there's either friction, delay, or a really high expense. We're seeing a lot of demand from platforms that want the first mile solving. The rest of it is their expertise. They just need the first mile solving. Also things like high-value transactions such as deposit payment for buying a car. Again, high-value transaction, there's some pain points there. So we're seeing some interesting use cases, which I would guess for most acquirers and gateways would represent new verticals. So it's more, I think, new complementary opportunity rather than substitutional. And also request to pay. So again, we were working with a major acquirer and a major utility player looking at how do you solve for the relatively small percentage of payers who don't pay direct debit, do pay by a bank push payment and check and are often late. Or the reference numbers are wrong. And again, real opportunity to increase efficiency, reduce cost. This particular company had a team of 25 people that just handled reconciliation issues. So some interesting use cases around payments. Again, we've talked the data opportunity. There's lots going on with fintechs and banks looking at showing you all of your finances in one place. Actually, more in the more in the commerce arena, it's loyalty, where we're seeing some interesting early demand. So either merchants or loyalty platforms looking to access a broader set of transactional data to drive more insight. So we're seeing that come up a number of times. And again, I won't dwell because we've talked about it in some of the other sessions. Lots of use cases coming up around verification and onboarding. So access to that account so that you can confirm there's an account in there. You can potentially confirm some of the information. You can confirm balances. It's being used in, so examples such as one customer said, well, if you can confirm this bit for us, we can get a loan to the customer 2 days earlier, which is great for them and it's great for our P&L. So there are a number of identity and verification use cases that we're seeing. So it's relatively early market, and we will have these challenges as the quality of the APIs develop. But right now, there's real opportunity here. So it's an interesting environment to be. But I guess back to the bigger vision, we think this will really succeed. through, I guess, the creation of a much more customer-centric ecosystem. So we've built our platform effectively to help the ecosystem players drive this as an endpoint. There's a couple of components here. So the vision really is, we think this creates the ability for a genuinely customer-centric ecosystem, and one that kind of connects the customer's finance world with their commerce world, so it becomes easier to create embedded payment experiences, onboarding experience, in a way that's easier for the different ecosystem players and the customer, that's more secure, so that there's no credentials being passed and shared around, and effectively with much more control. So I think the key to this open banking world really working is the ability to have more intelligence around the permissions that are being granted. So permissions to pull a payment or permissions to access data. So again, we believe for this to really, really fire and really scale, you need the kind of programmable conditions and permissions. So actually, if you're granting access to a merchant to help an onboarding and the setup of a subscription, you don't want to open up access to everything. It's defining the permission for that exact scenario. If you are, setting a regular payment for your online supermarket shopping, you might want to make sure then that has conditions that says, if it sits within this range, it's my normal sort of transaction, so don't ask me to do a two-factor secure customer authentication, push it through. But if it's outside of that, do ask me. Some of the necessary helpful friction that I think makes it work better. So moving very much from back to that, the existing world sort of works around, it's the account number in the middle that hooks the whole world together. Actually, if you've got a strong cryptography model that allows the customer to connect their financial world with the rules and the conditions and controls around it, you move from a card-on-file world to a customer-centric world. That's the vision that we're driving, and we're working today with a number of forward-thinking banks, with a number of acquirers and gateways, with a few big-end merchants, with a whole load of developers and fintechs who are looking to leverage some immediate opportunities, but also work towards this, I guess, much more customer-centric vision. I know I've talked about a number of use cases, but just to sort of bring this to life a little, I can just show a quick demo of what, for example, a new customer sign-up could look like we're increasingly moving towards a subscription economy, far more services. It's a sign-up, giving approval for ongoing payments. So we've got a short example here, if I can work it. So this is John. John, like me, hates shopping, really hates shopping. His mates told him about this great service where you can get a fantastic box of clothes every month. He wants to sign up for that. There's the opportunity here to connect financial world with commerce world. So this is just what a sign up for the subscription economy could look like, where you can access both data and payment, and with a much more programmable set of controls. So hopefully this will work. Yeah, so this fictitious merchant, Crispin, he's selecting the package, so the £35 a month box of clothes. He would typically have to provide, all of the usual name, address, email address, phone number, provide payment credentials. The ability in this world exists to actually say, no, I'll pair through connecting with my bank, and that can access just the data that's required for that sign up, and support the creation of the subscription from whatever payment source he wants to fund it from. But genuinely through a single click, create a subscription. I applied last week for the London Marathon. I apply every year, fail to get in every year. And every year I have to go through the same process of filling out all of the same information, providing all of the card details again. And I was trying to do it on the train back to Milton Keynes, kept losing Wi-Fi, then failed, had to start again the next morning. It took 1.5 train journeys to do this. And it was all information that would be easily accessible from just saying, I'll pay with my bank. So as I say, this is the vision we're working towards. We're super excited about the open banking opportunity, yet we're very realistic in terms of the limitations. So we're working on some of the existing use cases. We're driving towards this vision, and we're working with, as I say, a number of players across the existing ecosystem. Our role we see is as a technology enabler for the players. So whether that's the banks to make this work more effectively, whether that's the acquirers and the gateways, whether that's the merchants, we're looking to be a technology enabler. So again, I don't know if we have any time for questions, but I'll be very happy to chat to people further afterwards. Oh, and by the way, if that little example was interesting to look at, we've got a URL, there's a QR code. You can go and have a look at that afterwards, just to see the experience a little more slowly.
Wonderful. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Chris.